It's hardly controversial to say that Leon White, aka Big Van Vader, is the greatest big man in the history of wrestling. When people think of Vader, they immediately think of that menacing aura, the stiff shots, the vicious moves, and even the odd highly agile thing he could do. Every inch of him was this flawless, bullying monster heel. His glory years in the 1990s are such that still, to this day, he is the benchmark that every big wrestler is compared to, and he has been since those times. When someone as good as a Keith Lee or an Umaga or whoever comes up for example, will say that he reminds us of Vader. When Aja Khan, one of the few who can match the Mastodon's achievements, dominated Joshi back in the 1990s, people usually said that she was the female Vader. Almost everywhere that he went, Vader was at the very top of the tree, this sadistic final boss that all the faces had to try and take out. But there is one exception there, of course. While Vader came close, he never quite made it to the top in the WWF. During 2.5 years with the company, there was a lot of time where he never really fit in, especially during what was a lengthy period of transition for the company. By the time the Attitude Era rolled around, Vader was basically stuck in the mid-card, doing very little and wasting away. He thought he was slipping out of the business, and a lot of people thought he was done. But it turns out he wasn't. When he finally left, he went back to Japan and went to All Japan. It could have just been a little run, but it turned out to be his final great period. 1999 saw him return to the place where he belonged, at the head of the pack. It was the comeback of the year. It all makes for a cool story, so it's time to revisit it. This is roughly 2 years or so in the career of Vader, from 1997 to 1999, when he went from pretty much his bottom as a jobber to the stars in the WWF, to the top of All Japan and the world of Pro-Res once more. The best place to begin this look back, really, is a month or so after WrestleMania 13 in 1997. Vader was still at or pretty much close to main event level in WWE for the most part. He was part of the Final Four in the 97 Royal Rumble, and as such he was in the Final Four in Your House main event for the world title in February, won by Bret Hart. Under Paul Bearer's management at the time, he had a short-lived tag team with Mankind where the two spent almost as much time beating each other up as they did beating their opponents. At WrestleMania 13, they'd fight for the tag team titles against Owen Hart and the British Bulldog in a rare heel versus heel match that ended in a double countout. So Vader was still on the higher levels of the card, even if he wasn't exactly the main feature. However, something was about to happen that would certainly raise his profile, for better or worse. The fateful tour to Kuwait in April of 1997 would have seen the cards headlined by Vader going up against The Undertaker, with Undertaker now the WWF champion. Indeed, the plan at this stage was for Vader and Taker to tour on the house shows and then have a bout at Maze in Your House A Cold Day in Hell for the title. But this all changed one morning when the pair appeared on a breakfast TV show to be interviewed, and the host, one Bassam Al-Othman, well, he said the F word. He flat out asked Vader and Taker if what they did was real or fake. Undertaker, a somewhat curious sight for 1997 dressed in street clothes, gives the sort of simmering, angry but diplomatic answer you would expect. It's clear the question pisses him off, but he doesn't go over the top. Vader, well, as he says himself, he is not quite as diplomatic as Undertaker, and takes quite a bit of offence to this TV host belittling what he does for a living. Cue another big John Stossel versus Dr. D. David Schultz type incident.
Is it just for the wrestling shows that...
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, yeah.
You gave him a chance to respond to that question.
This is the question I'm going to ask you now.
I'd like to respond to the same question.
Okay, please, go ahead.
Well, my astute colleague, the heavyweight champion of the world, very diplomatic individual. I'm perhaps not quite so diplomatic. In fact, I find your question and your remarks insulting to what I do. Physically, no man can do what I do in the ring. If they could, why wouldn't they be out there making the type of money we make and enjoy the type of fame and lifestyle that we enjoy? So I find your remark and your question insulting.
It's not my question, it's somebody...
Does that fucking feel fake, huh? Does that feel fake?
Anything.
Does it?
Oh, no, just...
Why don't you come down tonight, and before I kick his ass, I'll kick your ass.
Okay.
All right?
Just calm down.
Hey, we're not here to be insulted. I'm not here to be insulted.
Okay. Right,
As a result of this fracas, Vader is immediately arrested, both for assaulting the host and for public indecency because he said another F word, that being fuck, of course, on live TV. Even him carefully putting the table straight didn't stand in his favour. There was a bit more to it, of course. The whole thing was kind of set up by the producers of the show. They told the wrestlers in advance that Hoffman was going to ask the question and told them to react accordingly. Only trouble was Al Hoffman didn't know that they, or at least Vader, was going to react in this way. That's Vader's account of it, largely. Bruce Pritchard mostly agrees with the account, but does mention that the wrestlers were told not to do anything physical. Alas, Vader didn't quite get that memo. He would spend the next 10 days trapped in Kuwait. Mind you, he wasn't in a jail cell, he was under house arrest in a luxury hotel. There was another little incident during his 5-star lockup that apparently required several people to calm the Mastodon down, but it was because he'd drunk a bit too much. Late last year, in an interview with JBL, Gerald Briscoe even claimed that the US Special Forces had made an offer to smuggle the £350 Vader out of the country so that he wouldn't get into any further trouble, but ultimately the offer was declined, and Vader decided to face the music. He could have conceivably faced a year in a Kuwaiti jail, a real one this time, for the incident, but the end result was a fine. Back home, Vader's kerfuffle with the Kuwaiti morning host made national news. It was all over the funny pages, and got plenty of comments on TV, even being shown on Good Morning America. While obviously not happy about the whole thing, the WWF certainly tried their damnedest to make the most out of the publicity, even trying to get Vader on Good Morning America in person, perhaps to see if these hosts could handle such a potentially tricky interview. On the shows, it added another layer to the Vader character. Even if Vader certainly wasn't shy of beating up officials and suits during his WWF run, he was now more unstable than ever, perfectly capable of beating up civilians for even the slightest perceived provocation. Upon his return to the States and to Monday Night Raw, Jim Ross interviewed Vader about the incident, which naturally resulted in Vader getting heated, threatening Jim Ross, only for one of the WWF's most recent acquisitions, former UFC fighter Ken Shamrock, to come in and make the save just before JR took a beating. And that's the setup for Vader's next pay-per-view match. In Your House, A Cold Day in Hell on May the 11th wasn't the most high profile of shows, to say the least. Like a lot of WWF shows back then, it wasn't a big seller on pay-per-views or anything like that, and it's not an amazing must-watch show, though it's decent on the whole. This still wasn't a good time as far as the company's business went. And yet there's a lot of historical significance on this card. The opener sees Hunter Hearst Helmsley take another win, firmly out of the doghouse after the infamous MSG curtain call, and with Chyna, who debuted at Final Four a couple of months earlier, by his side. The second match features Mankind, fresh off a failed attempt at Taker's title and with little to do really, going up against the blue chipper Rocky Maivia, who's already getting the crowds on his back. There's no hints here as to just what these two would go on to do together. The third match continues the establishment of the Nation of Domination as a storyline force, pushing the company further towards stables, and the main event features Undertaker going up against Stone Cold Steve Austin. Fresh from one of the greatest bouts ever, the double turn submission match against Bret Hart at WrestleMania, this is the Rattlesnake's first singles main event shot at the world title, and the screwy finish will go a long way to setting up his feud with the Hart Foundation that will dominate the summer. So many elements of the Attitude Era are forming on this very card, and that includes the semi-main event, which features the in-ring debut of former UFC fighter and self-styled world's most dangerous man, Ken Shamrock, going against Vader. It is fair to say that expectations for Shamrock's WWF debut weren't that high. After all, the memory of the world's strongest man, Mark Henry, considered a complete and total failure by this point, was still fresh in the mind, and Shamrock's kind of awkward inclusion into the WrestleMania match between Hart and Austin hadn't done him an awful lot of favours. However, vignettes and promos had seen Shamrock get gradually more comfortable, and he did at least have a bit of pro wrestling experience to fall back on, even if it was years ago, before his career in MMA. And in Vader he had a pretty good partner for his first WWF match, not just because Vader's such a strong and stiff big man, but the Mastodon's experience in UWFI in the mid-90s wrestling shoot style, in theory, was something that would put him in good stead for getting something out of Shamrock. The match would also have a no-holds-barred rules type setup with no pinfalls and submission or knockout being the only way to win. And so the stage is set for a pretty different WWF match indeed. And the match itself is, well, it's actually fantastic. It far exceeded any expectations. As you might expect, the pair certainly take lumps out of each other. There's more than a few hammers from Vader, but he takes an absolute pasting from a still rough Shamrock who's got a lot of stank on those low kicks and manages to break Vader's nose with knee strikes. It's perhaps as stiff a match as there has ever been in the WWF ring, and it'd affect both wrestlers physically for a time, although there is still time for some decent mat work here and there. It packs a lot into a short time of about 10 minutes, and a crowd that's quiet to begin with really gets into it, even if they've not seen much like it before. This does indeed take a lot from Vader's UWFI matches against Takada and the like, but that shoot style element translates pretty well. Vader utterly dumps Shamrock on the floor from a suplex, and even goes for the almighty Vader salt, but Shamrock evades the super move. The ending's awesome. Following an onslaught in the corner from Shamrock, Vader counters with perhaps the deadliest meat hook he's ever thrown. The crowd is aghast, Jim Ross shouts "good grief" and some people may have vomited. But Vader gets cocky. He poses over his seemingly fallen foe, Shamrock takes him down from the ground and traps him in the ankle lock to get the tap out. It's a brilliant match, one of Vader's best WWF matches, and certainly one of Shamrock's. The only regret that people had really was that Vader shouldn't have been Shamrock's first WWF opponent. If they'd have built Shamrock up towards facing Vader, this could have been even better. But they wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and the end result was excellent. So perhaps grabbing that Kuwaiti TV host by the tie was a net positive for the Mastodon, in the end. Perhaps even bigger opportunities can come from it. As much as the match with Shamrock was a fantastic one, the injuries that Vader sustained from it put him on the shelf for a few weeks, and he couldn't compete in June's King of the Ring tournament. His spot was taken by Hunter Hearst Helmsley in the storyline, and he'd go on to win the whole thing. Whether that was the plan all along is anyone's guess, but it doesn't seem like it was. The end result of it was Hunter winning the tournament that he had originally been penciled in to win in 1996 before the curtain call, but considering how much chaos was going on in the Fed at this time with the drama and real-life backstage fights between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, it wasn't exactly the leading item in the rag sheets. As far as Vader goes, well, he's written off TV for a few weeks to get his nose repaired, eating a decisive loss to Ahmed Johnson, which is not what anyone would call a good sign. And yet, the chaos in WWF would intervene again. At the King of the Ring, Undertaker defends the title in an utterly middling match against Farouk. A week later, he teams with Ahmed Johnson against Farouk and Kamel Mustafa, played by the returning Charles Wright. Taker eats a shock clean pin against old mate and BSK comrade Mustafa, and Ahmed turns on Taker as a result. This was supposed to set up Ahmed fighting Taker for the title at the next In Your House, Canadian Stampede. However, again, barely a week later, Ahmed blew his knee out at a house show, and that match is off. Vader, on his return from surgery, was supposed to fight Psycho Sid at Canadian Stampede. However, he's free now because Sid, along with several other wrestlers, got caught in an automobile accident which took him off the show. And so Vader goes from having nothing at all to being shoved into a title match against The Undertaker at Canadian Stampede. And again, all of this is occurring at the same time as the Michaels and Hart drama, with speculation rife that the Heartbreak Kid might leave the company altogether. It's an absolutely manic time. Reading observers from Lee's days, you get the impression that old Big Dave was struggling to keep up with it all. Vader at this time was still managed by Paul Bearer, and while Vader had a screwy victory over Taker at the Royal Rumble to build on, this isn't so much a feud between Taker and Vader as it is another chapter in Taker and Bearer's feud, which had been going on since 1996. There is some historical significance here. This programme is the first time that Bearer mentions the name of Kane, the half-brother that Taker apparently left to die in a fire along with the rest of his family. Bearer reveals this after Taker and Vader were forced to team together, which naturally resulted in Taker giving Vader a first-class ticket to Tombstone City. Bearer also reveals during this feud that Kane is still alive, and all the while Taker generally gets the upper hand on the Mastodon through the programme. So yeah, it's not like he's getting set up to win here. He is by far the least important part of this feud. The match itself takes place on a show that, for all the chaos surrounding it, goes down as one of the greatest in the history of the company. An ungodly furnace of heat in the Calgary Saddledome, with just about every match being at least good and the 10-man main event being utterly incredible. Such is the way with the WWF. When chaos reigns and a show seems confused and unpromising, greatness can occur. That's never changed. While Vader vs Taker is hardly a big reason for Canadian Stampede's excellence, it's still two very good wrestlers indeed putting on a good hoss fight for the belt. Certainly plenty of cool striking, as you might expect from these two. It's very much a typical Taker match, but it works against a good opponent, and it especially works with a crowd this molten. Calgary went utterly wild for everything on this night, including this match. After 12 minutes of action, Vader attempts to go for the Vader Bomb. However, Taker responds in kind to a low blow Vader used earlier with a foul of his own, and hits a chokeslam from the ropes for a near fall. A second chokeslam gets another near fall, and then the Tombstone gets the pin. Bearer bringing up Lee's personal demons from Taker's past and accusing him of murdering his entire family wasn't enough to distract Taker from the task at hand, as it turns out. It's far from the best match on this card, of course, but it's still a perfectly fine match, and Vader's obviously good enough in the role that he's hastily been thrust into. No doubts about that. Taker and Vader continue to go at it on the house show circuit through July, with a casket stipulation added. On TV, Vader has an odd little heel versus heel mini-programme with Hunter, based around friction between Paul Bearer and China, of all things. Yeah, not much going on, really. Vader doesn't make it onto the SummerSlam card. All the USA vs Canada stuff's going on, Taker's got Bret Hart to face now, and Vader doesn't have a feud. He could have been on the card, of course, if not for other incidents. There was a plan to finally run Vader against Sid at SummerSlam, which the Fed had been trying to do for months but hadn't due to the Sid's various injury troubles. But again, it doesn't happen. Sid makes a brief appearance on the July 14th Raw, but collapses in the back. You'd barely even know he was there, really. When I say brief appearance, I mean he appears on stage with Austin and several others to stare down the Hart Foundation, he's in street clothes, and they don't even do a close-up of him because he'd lost tons of weight. The injuries from the automobile accident had taken their toll, and after this Sid leaves the WWF completely to undergo neck surgery. All that said, I presume he probably played a fair bit of softball too. You can't stop Sid from playing softball. Nothing could stop Sid from playing softball. So Vader's not on one of the year's biggest cards. Hell, there's not a lot going on for him at all, really. Aside from this little slow burning thing that's happened every so often where Vader, seemingly unwittingly, has benefited from actions of the Hart Foundation, he's been in matches with people like Ken Shamrock and Goldust, who are feuding with them, they've attacked the opponents, and Vader's won. It's the sort of detail I kind of imagine is a Vince Russo touch, as it's all very TV-ish, and it does ultimately have a resolution. It comes to a head on the 18th August War, when Vader has a match with the Patriot, Del Wilkes, who's going to face Bret Hart at In Your House Ground Zero for the title. Bret himself is on the ramp studying his opponent. Del Wilkes gets a fairly shocking win following an Uncle Slam, at which point the pissed off bully Vader naturally attacks, beating the Patriot up and prepping him for a Vader Bomb. Until Bret enters the ring and attempts to lay the Canadian flag over the Patriot. Vader sees this and, well, he doesn't much care for it. He takes the flag, snaps it in half, and attacks Bret. The Hart Foundation descends on him, but Patriot helps to clear them out of town. So yeah, it's certainly a rather odd face turn, but it is, of all things, a face turn for Vader, a guy who up to this point had basically never ever played face. I suppose that's kind of a Vince Russo touch as well, although it is common in this storyline where all different kinds of wrestlers, faces or heels, were often unified by a hatred for the Hart Foundation and their anti-American ways. And at least it finally gives a chance for Vader to enter into one of the company's main storylines and be a player there, rather than the bunkum going on with Paul Bearer and Taker and Kane and all of that. My guess is that Vader essentially took the role in the storyline that Sid would have probably fit into if he hadn't left. If Sid had stayed, who knows, maybe Vader could have joined the Hart Foundation and become a turncoat. You never know when it comes to good old Vic Venom after all. One result of Vader's face turn is that he does manage to get one last world title shot against Bret Hart, although it's only on Monday Night Raw. Their no-holds-barred match on 8th September is naturally short-lived. There's a bit of good brawling, but it soon descends into a schmuzz with the rest of the Hart Foundation, the Patriot, and ultimately Steve Austin. He also teams with the Patriot for a couple of losing bouts on pay-per-view, and has a dog collar match against Bulldog, which he does at least manage to win. Still, the best match of this Vader face one would actually occur in the UK, and it's one of the best matches of his whole time in the WWF. A classic Vader vs Underdog battle against Owen Hart on the one night only pay-per-view in Manchester. As you might expect, Vader kinda goes back into heel mode for this match as the crowd are very much behind Owen, and so Vader pulls out all the classic bully tricks that, he's much more accustomed to. It's all about beating Owen up and powering him down and just flat out smothering him. Hell, it might just be the most Vader that Vader's ever looked in the company. The crowd goes thoroughly wild when Owen actually manages to make a comeback on Vader with his own awesome moves, the Enziguri, spinning wheel kick, missile drop kick into kip up, sharpshooter and so on, and it seems for a second that he might just be able to upset the odds here. But then he goes off the ropes once too often, straight into a sick Vader power slam for the 3. Awesome ending and another classic Vader thing where, against him, just about any move can end the match at any time. Again, this is something rarely seen with Vader in a WWF ring. Maybe if they'd have just let him be this way for more of his time there, things could have worked out differently. Anyway, this is a real good match. It's close between this and the Shamrock match for Vader's best match in the company, as far as I'm concerned. Vader continues to be a face against the Foundation for the rest of the feud's duration, all the way to Survivor Series, where he captains a team of Goldust, Mark Miro and the debuting Steve Blackman in a losing effort to Bulldog, Jim Neidhart, Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon. It's as mid-card as it gets, although obviously after the Montreal screwjob at the end of this show, not many people cared a jot about what happened on the undercard. Vader still remains a face with not much to do after Survivor Series, and indeed he'll not really be a heel for any other time in his WWF run. He'll just kind of be there, basically. We've gone into a lot of detail for Vader in '97 because he was at least doing plenty of stuff through the year. He still ended up being quite featured even if a lot of it was due to circumstances. For 1998, well, there's a lot less to report on in all honesty, because it was when his wheels fell off for good in the company. And if you look at the house show cards from the time, you can see why. His replacement has now arrived. And pretty soon his replacement is going to eat him alive and basically finish Vader in the Fed. As soon as Kane made his WWF debut at Bad Blood, the bell started to toll for Vader. The Big Red Machine was presented as thoroughly unstoppable. Corny storyline or not, it wasn't too tricky for Kane to get over because he appeared to be invincible, even if there wasn't any inkling that the gimmick of being Undertaker's scorned and burned half-brother would sustain Glenn Jacobs for well over 20 years. As soon as he debuted, he would face Vader on the house show circuit, and naturally he'd win every time clean all over the country. It's kind of clear immediately that Vader is no longer the top big man in the company. It's Kane, and he'd beat Vader up for a couple of months on house shows before doing it on pay-per-view, as if the old guy was teaching the ropes to his inevitable replacement. It took a while for the house show feud to come to telly. Vader started the year with a quick feud against Tafka Goldust, beating him at the Royal Rumble only to then be eliminated by Goldust during the Rumble match itself, despite entering at number 30. And after that, well, it's Kane time. Right here at the very beginning of the Attitude Era, Vader's going to find that there's no longer a primo seat at the table for him, just when the company's on the cusp of a boom. This feud begins just after the Rumble, where Kane had seemingly done away with Taker by shoving him into a casket and setting it on fire. Vader becomes his next victim, and while Vader won't back away, there's not much he can do. He even frickin' Ganso bombs Kane during their first brawl and it doesn't do much. A fire extinguisher seems to be the only thing that works. At this time they were running the possibility of Kane being blind in one eye, although this part of the character was ultimately forgotten. The match itself at No Way Out of Texas, well, it's fine, but it's basically a burial. It's noted that Vader is still pretty over with the crowd. With Taker gone, he's seemingly the only guy with a remote chance of stopping Kane. But what little offence he gets in the match is only enough to stagger the monster, and this is frickin' Vader we're talking about here. And, well, if you thought Hogan popping up from Vader's powerbomb was bad, Kane not only pops up from the powerbomb, but he pops up from the frickin' Vader salt. The Mastodon's super move, the massive moonsault that was the end of you if it hit, and Kane pops up like he's frickin' Hawk. Vader is just not in his league. Eventually Kane hits a chokeslam, followed by a tombstone, and that's that. But not quite. Straight after the match, Kane puts an exclamation point on it all by clobbering Vader with a wrench, and Vader does the first and only stretcher job in his career. This is about as decisive a victory as you can get. It's as clear as day. The new big monster is here, and the old one is being wheeled out of the arena. The Kane match writes Vader off TV for a couple of months in order for him to have an eye surgery, which was partially related to the famous match he had against Stan Hansen at the Tokyo Dome in 1990 where his eye got taken out, and he's not at WrestleMania 14. He makes his TV return in May with revenge on his mind, and ultimately he gets the opportunity at Over the Edge on the 31st, in a mask versus mask match. Said match is a little bit more even than the first, but way worse. Hell, it's garbage. This is just an absolute slump for Vader. It's sloppy, there's no chemistry, just little to say. Nothing. Vader even manages to get a bit of time with the wrench, but even that can still only stagger Kane. Eventually he misses the Vader salt, and Kane replies with the tombstone for another win. Vader is unmasked, Paul Bearer gets to take the piss yet further, and of course we get the kind of infamous interview with Michael Cole afterwards. Let's remind you of that one.
Vader, you wanted revenge tonight, but it didn't happen. What happened out there?
Man, a man usually don't have any excuses. I came here tonight to compete and I got my butt whipped. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I trained, look at me, I'm so big! Maybe Vader time's over. I'm nothing but a big piece of shit. A big fat piece of shit.
Well,
It should be noted that Vader talking about how fat he was, I do reckon was probably scripted. He was heavier than usual, and the office was on his back throughout this time trying to get him under 350 pounds. He did do that, but crash dieting to do it caused him to miss shows due to high blood pressure, and at that point it seems like The Office, which always had a few people who were negative on Vader, saying he was washed up and that his accomplishments outside the Fed didn't matter, stop me if that one's familiar, just gave up on him completely. The less said about Vader's last few months in the WWF, the better. For any storyline idea that Vader might rededicate himself after this final decisive loss against Kane, his last period in the WWF consists mainly of more losses, and usually in terrible matches. Even if in-ring quality was hardly a focus during the Attitude Era, watching Vader through most of 1998 was just kind of miserable. The spark had gone. He obviously wasn't happy in the company, or indeed with wrestling in general. At Fully Loaded, he loses to Mark Henry. At this time, Mark was just another member of the Nation of Domination, and still fought as a complete flop, stinking up the mid-card on $1 million main event money every year. At Breakdown in September, he lost to Bradshaw. This was pre-Acolyte, so Bradshaw was just another guy who was basically doing naff all at the time. Didn't have any charisma or anything. These feuds and bouts against Henry and Bradshaw are heatless shit shows, and I suppose the only thing we can say is that at least Vader didn't take part in the bloody brawl for all. Thank God that didn't happen. Vader tends to get more high-profile matches on the house show circuit, often against Mankind or Kane or The Rock even, but the TV's just miserable. Even the commentary seems to do little but take the piss out of him, saying everything short of directly calling him a fat old lummox. A series of more losses ends his run with the company on TV, with the final one being against marvellous frickin' Mark Miro of all people. That's how bad it got. The only one that's really of historical interest is a job on Shotgun Saturday Night to a young Canadian wrestler who'd not long debuted, a guy by the name of Edge. Other than that, well, it's an awful period, and at last in October, it's over. Vader's final match in the WWF is a triple threat for the Intercontinental title at MSG on the 25th, where Ken Shamrock successfully defends against him and Mankind. As far as Vader's general unhappiness with the WWF goes, it didn't really have anything to do with him jobbing. As much of an unstable bullying monster as he appeared to be in the ring, Vader was a consummate professional outside of the ring, something backed up by most of the people who worked with him, even if he wasn't quite as diligent about washing his gear. For all the stiff shots and big moves that he's famous for, his matchmaking in the back and match calling in the ring were exceptional, and perhaps what he was best at overall. It had more to do with the fact that he just wasn't part of any plans. To not just be irrelevant, but to have basically nothing going on, was the main drive behind him asking for his release. His time with the company certainly had good moments, and some high-profile matches. Even the bouts with Shawn Michaels, despite them being kind of famous for HBK's odd tantrum here and there, were something that Vader looked on fondly, going so far as to say that Michaels was the greatest wrestler he ever worked with, alongside Mitsuharu Misawa. He even said this despite Michaels nixing the program they had early in favour of working with Sid, which certainly shows his magnanimous side. He thoroughly enjoyed working with Undertaker too, and was very happy with the Shamrock matches, although he was a bit more critical of Bret Hart, clearly preferring to work with Owen. But when there was nothing much left for him in the company, it got to the point where there were a few dark nights of the soul, and times when Vader briefly considered quitting the business altogether. However, he did have a plan for when he got out of the company. It's not like he was going to be short of work. He had a way to bring the real Vader back, and eventually he decided he was going to do just that. Where to now then? Under the terms of his release, Vader was able to work anywhere except for WCW, although it's possible that the agreement New Japan had with WCW probably meant he wouldn't be able to work there either. There was apparently a bit of talk between Vader and Paul Heyman to do some appearances for ECW, and that could have happened mere days after his release, but ultimately Vader turned it down as he thought it wouldn't play well politically with the company he did end up going to. Even back when he was fired from WCW in 1995, the option had been there for Vader to return to Japan by way of his good friend, fellow wrestling legend and top gaijin, Stan the Lariat Hansen. He could have gone to All Japan, teamed up with Stan, and they'd have kicked some asses. Ultimately he took the WWF option, and in retrospect he did wonder if he'd made the right move, if perhaps he'd have been better off going to Japan all along. Still, 3 years down the road, the offer is very much still on the table. Vader calls Hansen, and Hansen says that Giant Bubba still wants Vader to come over, team up with him, and kick some ass. They had in fact first teamed together on May the 1st, when an inter-promotional deal between All Japan and WWF saw Vader make a one-night trip over to be on All Japan's Tokyo Dome show. And so mere days after leaving the WWF, the wheels are already set in motion for Vader to make his big pro-res return. Only this time, rather than New Japan, where he'd originally made his name over there, he's going over to the other side. Vader's coming to All Japan, which means Vader vs Misawa, Vader vs Kawada, Vader vs Kobashi. Untold possibilities. That was the hope, and happily that hope would become the reality. It's time for the Mastodon to get his swagger back. So Vader debuts for AJPW in November, teaming with Hansen in the Real World Tag League tournament. It's his first appearance in the tournament, of course, and it's Stan Hansen's 17th in a row, second only to Giant Bubba. This terrifying team's first match is on the 14th of November, and they absolutely maul Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa, getting the win in just 7 minutes, and it's Vader who gets the pin against Misawa following a spike powerbomb and the Vader bomb. The difference is night and day. This is not the timid creature from his last weeks in the WWF, this is the monster bully we know and love. Vader attacks and hammers all around, the swagger, the arrogance. It's all there again, and he gets a pin on the top dog on his very first night back in Japan. It really didn't take that long for Vader to find his mojo once more, and it's a big sign of what's to come. The Hansen Vader team continue to destroy everything in their path, and they romp all the way to the final, winning every single match. No one can stop them. In that final, on December the 5th, they'll take on Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, the Burning team. Now I suppose you can probably tell where this one's going, but with the 4 wrestlers who are involved in this bout, a barn burner is most certainly expected, and that's exactly what we get. Hansen and Vader are vicious, imperious, and monstrous. For the most part, all the other team can hope to do is survive, whether it's through trying to take out a limb or getting little hope spots here and there. Vader is more dangerous than ever with those hammers just being out and out nasty, and the 49-year-old Hansen rolls back the years, as savage and ornery as he was in his prime. It seems like they're going to win, running through all the deadly moves on Kobashi, but just as Kobashi gets prepared for one final Western lariat, Akiyama hits Hansen in the back with a knee from the top, allowing Kobashi to hit a lariat of his own and get the flash 3 count. It's a damn fine match, and a great win for the native team. Although the Gaijins are sure to beat the crap out of them a bit more after the bell, there's no way Kobashi isn't getting that Western lariat. It also serves to make Vader look strong still. He doesn't eat the pin, the other team was scarcely able to stagger him at all even. Again, the difference is just phenomenal compared to what we've seen so far, and it serves as a preview for what's to come next year. The Mastodon is about to have quite possibly his greatest year ever. The plan was always for Vader to win the Triple Crown. Hansen said as much to him when Vader called. There's certainly no problem getting motivated again when you know you're going to be back on top. However, it didn't exactly happen the way it was planned to. Events in January of 1999 forced the hand of All Japan. First off, Toshiaki Kawada defeated Mitsuharu Misawa on January 22nd for the Triple Crown in a legendary match, but he broke his arm in the process and was immediately forced to vacate the title. And then, just 9 days later, on January the 31st, All Japan loses its father. Giant Baba succumbs to colon cancer, sending not just Pro-Res but the entirety of Japan into mourning. The man was a megastar in and out of the ring. As mentioned before, not many people knew that he was ill. He was in fact commentating on the Real World Tag League as normal last month, and he'd had his last match on the 5th of December, the same night as the final. His death came as a massive shock, and it sent the company reeling. Again, as has been mentioned previously, Mitsuharu Misawa would eventually take the role of company president following Baba's death, but for more details on that you'll want to check out the video on All Japan's Great Exodus. In the meantime, a new Triple Crown champion must be crowned. With Vader being as hot as he is certainly one half of the equation. He was due to be Kawada's first defence, and he further cements his spot in January by pinning Kenta Kobashi in another fantastic match that's worth seeking out. I probably don't need to tell you that it's the best Vader singles match in years, far exceeding even the best matches he had in the WWF. Toshiaki Kawada chooses his longtime partner Akira Taue as the man to face Vader. Probably not the most obvious choice of opponent, but part of this was to save the naturally huge match on the cards, Vader vs Misawa, for a significantly larger event, that being the Tokyo Dome. Vader and Taue are scheduled to meet then on March the 6th for the vacant title, and the return of the almighty Mastodon to a championship belt, something he never managed to win in the WWF, is at hand. Taue, as much as he may be overmatched against Vader, tries his best, often staggering the monster with his high kicks and trying to call up the spirits of the past. Whether it's Baba, who he's most obviously influenced by, or the almighty Jumbo Tsuruta, who had his retirement ceremony on the same night. Still, Vader is so strong at this point that a single Vader hammer is enough to knock pretty much anyone down. This awesome Mastodon is not going to be denied. It takes all of 12 minutes for Vader to get the win in a perfectly good match with his signature powerbomb. In his words in the back afterwards, Vader feels like he's on top of the world. It's quite a cool moment actually. The Japanese Vader, as monstrous as he is in the ring, is a bit more of a subdued and respectful presence when interviewed in Japan, mindful of the more sporty presentation, and there's a lot less of the American bully, especially here in All Japan. It's a historic moment too. In victory, Vader becomes the first wrestler, either Gaijin or native, to have held both the IWGP Heavyweight Championship and the AJPW Triple Crown. And in winning the title, Vader sets up the biggest match the company can do at the moment, Vader vs Misawa on May the 2nd at the Giant Baba Memorial Show. In just a few months, Vader has gone from jobbing on Shotgun Saturday Night to main eventing the Tokyo Dome.
Thank you. Tonight, I own the world.
Before the Dome, there's the small matter of another one of All Japan's big tournaments, the Champion Carnival, their older equivalent of the G1 Climax. Vader naturally goes in as favourite, and once again he tears through the field, winning most of his matches. He only drops points to Kobashi in a 30-minute draw, and to Misawa, his first pinfall loss in All Japan. His 15 points are enough for second place, and a spot in the final against Kobashi. It should be said that of all the opponents he had in All Japan, Kobashi was, I think, overall the best. They had several big matches and every time out it was absolute fire. In fact, Kobashi is one of Vader's best opponents, right there in the top bracket with Mick Foley, Tatsumi Fujinami and Stin. In Kobashi, Vader had a perfect partner, someone who he could hit as hard as he liked and was going to give just as much back. Every match between the two is awesome, and this Champion Carnival final in particular is an absolute war with both giving everything they got. But just as in January, it's Vader who finally comes out on top. Kobashi survives a lot. He even manages to kick out of the powerbomb and the Vader Salt. But finally an absolutely massive Vader attack takes him down. Vader gets to add the Champion Carnival trophy to his Triple Crown, utterly confirming him as the top dog. And in the back, well, it's all a bit much for him. You may not expect to see such a display of naked emotion from Vader, but this shows just how much he'd found that love of pro wrestling again, and how he welcomed the love of the fans. If Vince were here, he'd probably still be furious that Vader was piling on the pounds down at the old Ribera Steakhouse. He sure wasn't watching his weight now he was in Japan, thank God. But this guy here is pretty damn far from a big piece of shit. Vader vs Misawa on May the 2nd is of course in one sense the main event of the Tokyo Dome show, although really the headliner is Giant Baba, as it's his memorial show. In death, Baba finally managed to sell out the Dome, something he wasn't able to do in his lifetime. Vader and Misawa for the title is of course going to provide a suitably excellent closer for the show. As previously mentioned, Vader considered Misawa to be the greatest wrestler he ever shared a ring with, alongside Shawn Michaels. And with Misawa pinning Vader during the Carnival, well, there's no one better placed to conquer the Mastodon. The match is an absolute classic, 20 minutes of Vader hammers, elbows, and two greats going all out on each other, with Vader throwing absolutely everything at Misawa and then some. He even uses Misawa's own Tiger Driver against him. There's just so many dramatic moments, especially in the near falls, and a lot of huge bumps with Vader not just doing a lot of throwing around, but taking some pretty massive ones himself. In the end, Misawa takes a decisive control when the Vader Salt is missed, hitting a few super moves from the top, and then at last, in a straight fight between the Vader hammer and the elbow, Misawa's elbow manages to win out. A running elbow puts Vader down and caps off an absolutely glorious match, earning Misawa his 5th Triple Crown. This match is just an absolute must-see. A freaking breathtaking main event, more than worthy of the Dome. Just about any match Vader had in 1999 is recommended, but this one, it might just be his greatest match ever, and that's saying something. As far as business goes, Vader in All Japan wasn't necessarily enough to take the company out of its general slow decline. That was less to do with the wrestlers and the product than it was to do with a lack of exposure on television and the poor state of Japan's economy in the 1990s, the lost decade as it was called. Still, it was a shot in the arm, and the whole host of fresh matchups that Vader's presence made possible had seriously borne fruit. Even the most optimistic expectations of Vader in All Japan had been far exceeded. Even if he was basically a tourniquet for All Japan in a tumultuous year that saw the death of Giant Bubba, political squabbles getting in the way of Misawa as his replacement, and Kawada largely being absent through injury, he was a highly effective one, more than keeping the business ticking over. It was such an incredible turnaround, and wrestling fans were absolutely loving it. Let's put it this way, in 1998 The Observer talked a hell of a lot about Vader possibly retiring, being that he was 42, carrying quite a few injuries, and just being used like garbage in the Fed. In the 1999 Year End Awards, Vader came third in the overall Wrestler of the Year poll behind Misawa and Steve Austin only. That's how good his year had been. And hey, his 1999 still isn't finished yet. After a summer mostly spent in tag matches, the 4th of September sees Vader score a pin on Misawa in a non-title match that naturally sets up a proper rematch for the Triple Crown on the 30th of October. The big man's out for revenge. They meet on the 30th of October in a 12-minute hellblast of a match that absolutely kicks ass. The handshake Vader initiates before the match is scarcely an indicator of what's to come. It's as good as the match they had in the Dome, but for different reasons. It starts pretty quick with Vader throwing German suplexes, which naturally Misawa takes sickening bumps off, and it goes from there. Breakneck speed, no rest holds, just Vader and Misawa in full-on Hagler Hearns mode throwing nothing but big bombs. If you love this sort of heavyweight slugfest wrestling the same way I do, you will be in heaven here. We get so much. More suplexes, elbows and hammers for days, the top rope, suicide dives from Misawa, they do the Owen Hart power slam spot, Misawa nails the Tiger Driver. It is war. However, Vader is not going to be denied this time. He takes a decisive edge by throwing quite probably the sickest Vader hammer ever, one that Misawa bounces off the ropes and runs straight into, nastier even than the Shamrock one. One powerbomb later, and he's done it. Vader is a 2-time Triple Crown champion, and he finally has his big victory over Misawa to boot. In victory, he ends what would be Misawa's final Triple Crown reign, and once again celebrates with all his Gaijin chums in the back, giving special mention to the Gaijin's booker who makes this all possible. That being a certain Mr. Johnny Ace, of course. Following on from Vader's victory, there was a lot of talk from all Japan's Gaijins in particular, trying to convince Tokyo Sports to give Vader their highly coveted Wrestler of the Year award, an award that was limited only to native wrestlers. This didn't happen and Keiji Muto eventually took the prize, but you can kinda see their point as really no native wrestler was able to accomplish what Vader had done in 1999, not just in match quality, but in winning 2 Triple Crowns, a Champion Carnival, and having a Tokyo Dome main event. As it goes, Vader closes out 1999 quietly. His win against Misawa is the last Triple Crown match of the year before the Real World Tag League, and there he has a chilled out tournament, as his team with journeyman British wrestler Johnny Smith isn't ever one that's going to be competing for the big prize. Akiyama and Kobashi repeat their victory from last year, defeating Stan Hansen once again in the final. This time the Lariat teams with Akira Taue in what is pretty much his last main event outing before retiring in 2001. And speaking of Akiyama, well, he's set to be Vader's next opponent in January of 2000. What can All Japan's young ace in the hole do against the Mastodon from the Rockies? Akiyama gives Vader a damn good fight, as you'd expect. He's hella fiery, and when he gets a chance he'll certainly pepper Vader with shots and try to slow him down. This shows another thing Vader's a master at. We always talk about his incredible offense and all the great moves he does, but he is one hell of a seller. He's the king of the monster in peril selling. He doesn't just sell the effectiveness of the hit, he sells the shock of being hurt, the sudden amazement that he's hurt, almost not believing it. He is so good at that, and people don't talk about that sort of thing enough when it comes to Vader, as it's a big part of why he feels so legitimate. Akiyama really pushes Vader with knees and exploders, not to mention getting damn close to a submission with an armbar, but working on that arm will prove to be his undoing. Another thing Vader's really good at is the desperation shot. In Vader matches it feels less like wrestlers take turns to do things against each other, and instead there's these smooth transitions as one shot from Vader can stop an opponent in their tracks even when they're in full flow. He hits a quick Vader hammer from behind as Akiyama tries to hurt the other arm, and uses that to then fling Akiyama halfway across the ring with a German suplex, at which point this one's academic. He follows with a chokeslam and gets the 3 count in another awesome 15+ minute match. Again, seek out every Vader All Japan match, but make sure you don't miss this one. Straight after the win, Vader points to Kobashi on commentary and says, quite simply, "You're next, motherfucker." And indeed, he would be. The last chapter in Vader and Kobashi's rivalry comes in February. Kobashi has yet to defeat Vader, and he's constantly reminded of that through his beard. If you've ever wondered why Kobashi sported that little beard for a year or so in 1999, it's because after his first loss to Vader, he said that he would not go clean shaven until he defeated the Mastodon. And well, it's not happened yet. He gets his next chance on February 27th, and in the meantime Vader adds further to his accomplishments by winning the tag titles on the 20th with Dr. Death Steve Williams, freshly back in All Japan following his own utterly miserable excursion to the WWF and WCW. He had it even worse than Vader perhaps, although that's a story for another time. Kobashi comes into this match with taped ribs, and they'll certainly get one hell of a working over from Vader every which way, meticulous attention to detail as always. But to paraphrase an old saying, a wounded animal is often more dangerous than a healthy one. In a near 20-minute match, Vader and Kobashi will leave just about everything in there. As usual, there just seems to be that little edge to a Vader-Kobashi match over any other. To use another well-worn cliche, it feels like a big fight to see who the alpha male is, and the two always test each other to the very limit. As much as Kobashi takes every opportunity he can to inflict pain upon Vader, it feels like the amount of damage Vader does to his ribs is going to be the deciding factor. But if Kobashi has one great equaliser here, it's his lariat, and it's this sort of masterful storytelling between two legends that represents the very best of King's Road. Every swing of that arm feels like one final shot, like Kobashi's coming up for air. Yet it and the moonsault aren't quite enough, and again it feels like Vader's going to decisively take control. Vader sends him reeling with a Vader attack, but Kobashi uses that power, uses that momentum and his final sliver of energy to come off the ropes for one last shot. And with that shot, Kobashi manages to conquer the Mastodon at last. He's defeated Vader and he's become the Triple Crown champion in another phenomenal match. These two were just made for each other, really. A perfect matchup. Vader shakes Kobashi's hand in defeat, and Kobashi can finally shave that damned face fungus off. This is Vader's final All Japan title bout, and it's one hell of a way to cap everything, putting over the big rival who he'd been warring with ever since he came to the company. Even though Vader's final big title reign is done, he's not quite finished. A couple of weeks after the Kobashi match, Vader does finally get a chance to meet Toshiaki Kawada in a bout that was seemingly cursed, seeing as Kawada always managed to get injured as soon as it was booked. This long-awaited bout doesn't disappoint. Two of the all-time greatest strikers in the game bring the pain to each other, and you'll see plenty of stiff shots. Vader manages to get the edge in this dream match. One last exchange concludes with another sickening Vader hammer, followed by Vader damn near taking Kawada's head off with a clothesline for the victory. But his All Japan one will come to something of an abrupt end. A shoulder injury will see him lose early in the champion Carnival to Misawa, be on the shelf for about 4 months, and in the course of that time things go to hell in All Japan for reasons already discussed in another video. Misawa and almost everybody else goes off to forge their own path in a new company, Pro Wrestling Noah. Vader of course makes a decision to go along with everyone else to the new company. Vader will spend the next couple of years in Noah, and while he's not in the main event here like he was in All Japan, there will still be some fine moments. It's often cool to see him taking on the odd fiery younger wrestler in short blasts of matches. In particular, he has some excellent sprints with a young Takeshi Morishima. He'll also win the tag titles as part of a lengthy team with Scorpio, and he does get one final GHC title shot against Jun Akiyama in 2001, although this time he comes up short. Vader will certainly play a part in Noah for the first couple of years of its existence, but eventually in early 2003 he somewhat abruptly finishes up with the company, going back to America pretty much permanently. No surprises really. By this time he's 47 with a lot of wear and tear, and it's time to wind his legendary career down. And it's also time to wind down this video. In the context of his career, and indeed of his life, Vader's All Japan run is, I reckon, his greatest achievement in wrestling, which is saying a lot considering just what he achieved in the business. But the beauty of it is how it seemed to come out of nothing, how just before it the Mastodon seemed to be done. It was in many ways a big middle finger to the detractors he seemingly always had on his back in the WWF, who thought he was washed up, and even might have made the man himself think he was done for a short time. But he had so much more to give, and Vader's 1999 goes down as one of wrestling's greatest ever comebacks. And clearly it meant so much for him to be back in Japan, and not just to be on top, but to be loved and to be wanted. In this thing called wrestling that the one Kuwaiti host decided to call fake, the tears that Vader sheds after he wins the champion Carnival is one of those moments that feels incredibly real. Perhaps his legacy didn't necessarily need cementing as such, but after his time in All Japan, there was absolutely nothing left to prove. This was Vader, and without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, he was the greatest big man the wrestling business has ever known. Bye for now.